Hi, I'm Steve Tierney and this is the Madhouse podcast. Okay, so today we're following on from the last podcast where we said we would get players to send me some questions and we would do our best to answer them, and I've had a few, so begin working our way through them, I guess. So first of all, I had a message from Jason Flowers via Facebook, and he said, "Very good job, Steve. Glad we finally have something like this, and hopefully we can all help with suggestions." Well, absolutely, Jason. I then said, "Got a day or so till the next podcast. Why don't you send some?" And you sent nothing. Now, don't let that worry you, Jason. No, seriously. Feel free to send questions through when you think of some, and I will absolutely welcome them. Honest Ron, a famous Dungeonworld player, said that if I remember, I'll have to email a list of things to ask. The main one being a list of open jobs, or I should say cities for dukes to take over. Stuff like that. Well, yeah, some players did ask that, Honest, so no doubt we'll be able to cover that one. And in fact, moving straight on to Andy. Andy said, looking at the map, the cities I can see are what follows. Some of these cities may not be cities, others know better. Some may have some duke positions, Steve will confirm. Well, if they're a city, they will have a duke or a duchess, because all cities do, or should have anyway. And the names may not be current, he says. I'm sure others know more than me about that. And then he makes a few suggestions. So he knows Crown Heart, but doesn't know who's duke of that. He says Gorst, he believes is Kubala Wildfire. Yeah, I think that's my recollection as well. Hasjan and Jobala he doesn't know about. Lionel, he says, presumably Duchess Sandra Perrette. And yes, she's the injured Duchess who was one of the ones potentially going to be the new ruler, and the one who the attempted assassination was. So yes, you're right about that. Doesn't know Lux or Meadowbrook, neither do I at the moment actually. Very well. And then he says Poldoon, Duchess Glaze. Well, yes, by marriage, because the Duke of Poldoon was the Raven, who is a fairly well-known NPC in the game, and the Duchess is a player who married the Raven in the game. So yes, they would be the Duke and Duchess of Poldoon. Going on to Taulia, he's not sure whether Juliet is still the Duchess or not. Neither am I must check that, this probably sounds terrible that I don't know who the positions are, but these things become more and less important depending on where the grand plot is. So at one point remember the game's been running for 20 years, and at one point in time we knew all of them because it was important to know them, and then the game moved on to a different area and the interpolitics wasn't so important. Some players leave the game, and some characters die in the game, so I'll have to sort of go through it now, but it doesn't matter because the new ruler gets to set the ones the new ruler wants, so it's a fresh start, if you like, right now. And finally, of course, there's Wintred. Oh yeah, where have we got? On White Citadel. Yes, White Citadel used to have Duke Steadfast, who then became the king some years ago and is no longer with us. So White Citadel, we'll check that one out as well. The High Mage, well, it was an NPC called Maverick, who we think died in one of the previous episodes of the game, previous grand storylines that happened. And the High Priest, yeah, I don't think we've got a High Priest at the moment either. There was a player High Priest who left the game, and I don't think we ever replaced it with a PC or an NPC, so I think all of these are available to be set by the king. So thank you for that rundown, Andy. You're right, every city in the game should have a Duke or a Duchess, and I'll be looking to the new ruler and the player of the new ruler to decide who they're going to be, and let me know the other things. So I'll have to make some contact outside of the gameplay with that player just to see what they want to do. Okay, so I've got a question from Keith. Keith says, when the recent rebellion started, the bearers of the King's Shilling were going to be called up and moved to the fighting zones. When is this going to happen? That's a good question. So the King's Shilling is a thing that happened a few years ago in the game. It's essentially some characters have taken the King's Shilling, which means that they're sort of reserve army members. They can be called up in times of trouble and they will go and fight on behalf of the King. Now, I've not activated them as part of this version of the plot yet, and I'm not going to, because now we have a player king, and the player king's going to be the one who decides whether they need to be activated or not. There are costs to that in game, because whilst as a game mechanic they simply get teleported to the hot zones, the king as a roleplay element would actually have to pay something for that in the game, so there's a cost to be considered. And also there are some political costs, because not everybody who's a reservist wants to be called up if they're in the middle of something important they're doing themselves. So it should be interesting. I don't know what the current or the new ruler rather will decide, and that's to be determined. So that's kind of all the questions I've got today. I'm sorry it's quite a short podcast, but we will be expanding them a little bit. I would welcome some more questions for the next one, and but I'll be moving on to some slightly different topics and scenarios over the weekend. So until then, I guess it's just time to say layers.